G'day everyone, and welcome back to Digging Deeper Ag Chats with Al. I'm really excited to kick off 2026 with you. We've just finished our first full calendar year of podcasts, and I just want to say a big thank you to everyone who's listened, shared an episode, sent a message, or stopped me for a chat. I genuinely appreciate it. This year we're aiming to bring you even more great guests with plenty of practical conversations you can take straight back to your own operation. We'll be featuring more local producers too. People right here in our region who are doing good things, having a crack, who've got great stories worth sharing. I'm also pleased to say that we've got some regular voices returning. Chelsea from Herd Solutions will be joining us on a monthly basis with veterinary updates and timely animal health advice. And Morg from Elders is back as well, committed to a monthly livestock market update to help us make sense of what's happening and what it might mean on farm. So whether you're listening in the ute, on the tractor or in the yards, welcome back. I'm glad you're here and I hope you enjoy what we've got coming in 2026. Welcome back to the second half of Rob Manning's podcast. A lot of good stuff in this one, so enjoy. Now, another thing on cost of production, how do you like to work it out? What's your sort of back of envelope?
Oh, well, we just work out, take our accountant's figures and, you know, let's say your gross is X, your cost is Y minus X, divided into, 800,000 kilograms of beef or whatever it is. So you could work out, it's only a ballpark figure. And we've done all the, the figure analysis and benchmarking and whatever, and it's fantastic. It really gives you a guide. But I do think there's a point in that where every farm business is different. And I think you can get sucked in a bit, like, oh shit, look at their figures. But they're on a different stage of their growth, in a business. So when you're early on and a business is starting, you're young, you're having a go, you really push hard, and you're probably letting things. I know when we were doing it, we had really low cost of production figures, but we weren't doing any maintenance on our fences. We weren't doing anything. Had great figures, but the farm's falling apart.
Falling a bit.
So, but some other one who was further advanced or their business was more mature, they were starting to do that stuff. So their actual figure on the benchmark mightn't have been as good, but the farm was a much better farm in terms of capital, improvement and whatever. And the reality is now, like I look at what our business is, you've really got to, for us now, we're not really in the cattle business anymore. We're really in the land business. Land, and I don't know what happens in Gippsland, but where we are, where land price is so driven by lifestyle, Melbourne money, the actual land is probably only worth $1,500 an acre, in terms of production. But, nothing now makes under 15,000 an acre.
Right.
Farm there out the other day, only 3 or 4 k's from us, made $53,000 a hectare.
Seriously?
600 acres, pretty significant money.
Big property,
Yeah, so...
That's those tourists coming back, is it?
Oh, well, it's just, the distortion of the true value of land by lifestyle money is it's a double-edged sword. Like, it's great, your equity just goes up and up and up, but it makes it really difficult to expand your business. Like, our vision always is, get bigger, and always has been. It's always been our 10-year horizon, that whatever we are now, we want to be double that in 10 or whatever it is. But land price, so at some point in time, where do you start to think, do we just sort of level out and sit still? And I always think that's the road to destruction.
You don't seem like the sort of guy that does that.
No, well, I just say, not what I like. But, or at some point do you relocate capital? Or and I've often liked the model about, for where we are, we're in sort of northeastern Victoria, maybe we should be going up, further north and buying a, big place could run 3,000 or 4,000, 5,000 cows, bring all those calves back to we can fatten country we're an 800 mil rainfall. We can grow, 10, 12,000 kilograms dry matter per year. We can utilise over 50% of that feed. Like, we've got all the figures. We know what its potential is, but every time that we've gone north, looked at country, we should do that, and then a drought comes, and you go, shit, I'm glad I'm not stuck up there, somewhere. So I don't know, not my problem anymore. That's really the kids' problem for them to look at. So.
Now, you didn't really touch on it, but I know I listened to a bit of your stuff talking about labour efficiency in businesses. Do you want to explain to listeners a little bit about that?
Well, I think early in the life of a business, labour efficiency is really critical. Mm-hmm. And I just think early on, particularly in not the smaller farms, but farmers were very poor at allocating time priority about where they spend time. And, they might have been running, 200 cows and 2,000 or 3,000 sheep, and they reckon that was a full-time job. Well, you work it out, it's probably one labour unit for 3,000 or 4,000 DSE. I think and then again I look at the top 10% of the producers across Victoria, their labour efficiencies are like it's one labour unit, 12 or 15,000 DSE. Mm-hmm. Like, we currently run sort of 45,000 DSE with three people, and do it quite easy. I mean, we do use a bit of contracting for fencing and stuff like that, but I just think you've got to, but early on, so labour, when you get bigger, labour's not the real issue. But I think when you're on the smaller size and you're going to step up from one labour unit to two, that's a big lift in costs and whatever. And at the time, you always think, we can't afford it. But generally 2 or 3 years later, you'll go, we should have done that earlier, you know. So, I think labour efficiency, and of course, to have good labour efficiency, you've got to have good infrastructure, You can't have sort of crappy yards and things that take time and no laneways and whatever. But they all cost a lot of money to do that. But I think in the long term, particularly as you get that economy of scale, it becomes critically important to bring all that. That
word you mentioned before, that critical mass, isn't it?
Yeah.
Once you get to that critical mass, those decisions are a bit easier.
Well, I sort of let's say it takes $100,000 to run a family with 3 kids, buy a new car, get the kids to school, and so you're running your 300 or 400 cows. You're probably only making 200,000 net gross, and then you pay your costs. Whatever. There's not much left over after that once you run the family to do much. But suddenly, when you've got you can get past that stage, the cash accumulates once you get over that 100,000 stuff, and so suddenly you've got $400,000 excess over that. Then you've really got that ability to go and say, well, $400,000, an extra $300,000, I can go and borrow another $10 million, so I'll go and buy another place. Like, you've got that ability to do good options, which I said earlier about, developing systems that develop cash flow is just critical. Cash allows you to do things that so many other people can't do. And it's just about, I think everything you do has got to be efficient. It's got to be extracting full value out. And I'd say, if someone said to me, what's the main ingredient of success for that top 10% of people, farms that we looked at, it's about knowledge. It's about, you've just got to be soaking up knowledge from, agronomy, animal science, climate, financial, particularly now. All of those things. We're lucky in our system, my son's, he's an agronomist, my daughter's a cow vet, I'm a cow vet, I've got another daughter who's an agronomist type situation. So, we've got a lot of pooled knowledge, and if you don't have it yourself, you're going to pay for it. Get employ, someone like McKinnon Project or someone who's really into that type of stuff. Getting good advice is critical. I think without it, you're really behind the eight ball.
Yep. Yeah. Now, that's a nice little segue, because you have actually been asked up here to the Gippsland A Group to share your knowledge tomorrow on the... He rolled his eyes at me just then, but... And it's a Perennial Pastures one. We've got actually over 100 people attending tomorrow. I don't know whether you've been told, so better get your loud voice ready.
Yeah.
But do you want to share very quickly what you're going to share tomorrow and explain why it is so important in our farm businesses to be looking at this stuff?
Well, look, obviously, when I first sort of went farming, loved cattle, you wear your cow hat. And it's not until you've done a bit of mucking around you suddenly recognise, what are the real profit drivers on farm, and it's going to be about how much grass you can grow per hectare. And so you chuck away your cow hat and put on your grass hat, and then you're starting on the journey. And I look at back what we might have been the standard farm in Mansfield 35 years ago, growing 5,000-6,000 kilograms dry matter, whatever. Pretty hard to do much on that. You probably only sustain your 10 or 12 DSE on that. Once you put on your grass hat, realise the value of particularly perennials over that annual base. Mansfield's fairly fortunate that if you do nothing, most of your country will revert back to Victorian perennial ryegrass and clover. That's just what's naturally there. But and it's still good in its way. But there's so much better species around now. We've become very driven. We're involved with Peter Sale, Professor Peter Sale from La Trobe Uni. We did a lot of work with Polaris early on, and it's now become our chief driver of production across so much of our country. Do
you have a favourite variety that you're using?
Well, we're mainly using Holdfast GT. The aluminium stuff, we didn't get as good a GTL, I think it's called, whatever. I'm a bit out of it now. But Mansfield's very cold. We have soil temperatures when it's in a cold winter down as low as 5. Right. And ambient temperatures low. Your ryegrasses, although they're highly productive in that spring, ryegrass and clover, there's nothing better for weight gain in that little narrow window of about 5 weeks. But it'll only grow 8 to 9, 10, maybe 10 kilos a day per hectare. Our Polaris paddocks that we looked after, we were growing at least 20 kilos a day, twice the winter growth rate over the normal established, particularly ryegrasses. And the thing that allowed us to do was to really effectively nearly double our winter carrying capacity. I think every farm needs to think about where is the weakest link in our pasture chain, and it's always probably going to be May, June, July. But if you can double the feed supply in that critical time, so the feed deficit between the animal demand and the feed that's available is narrowed, you can carry a lot more stock in the winter, and the key for that is that allows you to really harvest that great potential that happens in the spring. Now, most farms, we can grow 120, 140 kilograms a day in at that height of the spring, but you don't have the stock to utilise it off.
Yes.
So you've grown it, it's cost you, but you've never cashed in on it. But if you can carry a lot more stock effectively in that winter time, you can start to harvest all that spring surplus.
Good growth.
Yeah, and you harvest it off either by putting body score on cattle. You can take them from 2.5 up to 4. For every 35 megajoules ingested, they'll put on another kilo a day.
Right.
And you can carry that on their back. So you take those light score cows from low 2s, medium 2s up to, say, 4. They're carrying around 100, 120 kilos, which equates to about 3,000 to 4,000 megajoules on their back. That when they pull that off, when you hit summer or autumn, you basically are releasing another, 3,000 megajoules that they've harvested for you anyway.
Yeah.
Or you take the top off and put it into silage or hay or whatever, but that becomes very expensive.
It's an interesting way to think about it. I've never actually thought about that, actually storing it instead of in a hay shed, store on the back of an animal.
Well, yeah, and it's cow systems, cattle, and I'll talk about it tomorrow, but and a very elastic form of production. Like with dairy cattle, there's no elasticity. Like
they're always tight.
Well, whatever I fed them last night, if I missed out and gave them 25 megajoules less than they should have got, I'll get 2 litres less in the vat today. So there's no elasticity in that system. In a beef system, we can mine the body condition off their back to carry through into those deficits without copping any penalty until we go beyond the biological constraints of that cow, which will be probably failure of reproduction or whatever. So that controlled grazing, which is probably just another term for rotational grazing, we use that to actually have a controlled weight loss off our cows.
Right.
So we're happy to, and we monitor it very carefully. Like we might want to lose 0.4 of a kilo a day or something at that time in the winter. It won't affect the reproductive ability of that cow. She'll have the calf, whatever, but we've carried that surplus over and whatever. So we have I'll put up some stuff tomorrow to show that we monitor, how many megajoules a day, what's going on, going down the throat, what's coming off, what deficiency they're in, and and it goes back to that HACCP system. So if we start to say, well, shit, these are losing, 35 megajoules of energy a day, what are we going to do about it?
Yeah. Now, do you use OptiWays or something like that in the paddocks, or do you know by experience with grass quality?
Now it's basically, it's all visual.
Yeah.
We're pretty good at it, I think, and we do get agronomists coming time to time to just sort of validate what we do, and we're always within 5-10%, a pasture cut or something like that. So I think my son's got fantastic. He should be here today, really. He knows a lot more than me. So we're very conscious of how we integrate our grazing system with our pasture system and our animal production system, and those three sort of fields of what the farm's built around, they are all inextricably linked.
Mm-hmm.
So you've only got to make a change in any one of those systems, and it has ramifications in the other systems. For example, let's say we got the grazing control and we didn't put enough grazing pressure on, say, October, whatever, December, November, we've got too much ground cover. We know that's going to affect our tiller set next autumn.
Yeah.
So we're conscious about, we stuffed up the grazing, didn't get it right, we're going to pay a penalty for here. And one of the systems that we ran in early, we were into a very acute rotational grazing system. We still are. We probably move, a couple of thousand cattle every 3 days, 4 days through rotational grazing systems. But
what are your mob sizes?
Pretty big.
Yeah.
We run mob sizes probably on average 250 cows. So with 250, so 500. We sort of reckon we need a grazing pressure of 300 to 500 DSE per hectare per day to seize control of, particularly in the growing spring, whatever. We never will graze a paddock for more than 5 days, no matter what. I think once you start leaving cattle in for more than 4 or 5 days, you're copping a penalty down the line. Early on, we were too focused on keeping too much grass cover, and it definitely was to the detriment of our clover.
Yep.
We saw we became grass dominated and the clover fell, and the thing that always sticks in my head, for every 1,000 kilograms of clover in your sward, there's about 24 kilograms of nitrogen that's coming back. So, you get the grazing wrong, suddenly, your N levels are dropping away pretty rapidly. So we're very careful about how we manipulate our pasture now. Our cattle really are just particularly those maintenance cattle are just a tool
Yeah.
to, for want of a better word, chronically hungry cow becomes their tool to manipulate our pasture. And then we'll just take the pasture away from them and allocate that into turn-off stuff that we're going to get paid for. So a bit of an art, a bit of a science, I think, with it.
Just with your rotation, how long before paddocks get regrazed? Have you got a sort of a
Well, it depends on the time of the year. Like in the spring, we might be 8-9 days, 8-10 days.
Oh, really?
More often, but in the winter, it's probably stretching out to 35-40 days.
Right.
We do use a fair bit of nitrogen when we have to. We can grow feed at about between 0.25 and 3 cents a megajoule. It's cheaper to be putting out nitrogen and gibberellic acid or whatever, particularly with Polaris. They are very responsive to that. We'd rather be doing that than using supplement. But
So do you do any foliar sprays with your gib acid, or is it?
Yeah. We do all that stuff there. So, pretty conscious about phosphorus, potassium. Some of our countries short might only have 100, 120 parts in it, but we've got to be careful too, because some of our countries can be loaded with potassium. Right. So grass tetany becomes a real issue. Once potassium gets over 200 parts, we've got to be careful. We've had a major issue in the past with grass tetany, particularly those cows on their third calf or better. They're the high risk cows. Certainly, what's changed, I think, we now don't really have a paddock now that's not reticulated with bore water, and that's cut our grass tetany losses by 85%. That bore water is beautiful water, but it's got calcium and magnesium in it. So that's been a great saver. I mean, and the other thing I think, again, we talked about, that grazing control. When it's tough, you're grazing in the winter down to one leaf, particularly on the ryegrasses. Well, you become a standing target then for grass tetany in those high-risk older cattle, because what's happening at one leaf, the potassium-magnesium ratio drops as low as like 1 to 2, 1 to 3. At 3 leaf, the ratio is 1 to 6.
Right.
So once you start to graze short, you actually change the whole rumen composition of potassium in the rumen and salt. When we did all the trial work looking at grass tetany, most of the cattle that die of grass tetany, I don't know if it's an issue in Gippsland, but most of the cattle that die of grass tetany actually have enough magnesium in their rumen. They just can't shift it across the rumen wall.
Right.
And so if you've got high potassium or low sodium in the diet, that inability to move magnesium across a membrane is very difficult, and they're the cows that die. So again, we now have a pretty standard routine mix in the winter on all those high-risk cows, which, as I say, they're third calf or better. We give them unlimited salt with coarse mag.
Just a loose lick in the paddock somewhere?
I just check it out in drums and chip a bit of molasses on. And we've cut our grass tetany losses dramatically. They used to be pretty high at one stage.
In addition to that bore water, you think?
Certainly the bore water has been really good, been fantastic. And we were forced into that with droughts in 2001, 2007, and this year water's going to be an issue, I think, for a lot of farmers in the northeast. I don't know what you're like down here.
No, it was actually the mountain calf sales. You would have heard of them. There's one of the big vendors, the Faithfuls, I think it is. They've had to sell early because
no water.
Lack of water. They're running out of feed as well, but the water was a real issue apparently. So.
I think that'll be right across, southern Australia, I think, at the moment.
We had Ben Young on here from Chiltern Park, and he said wire and water. That's his two mainstays, because you've got wire and water, you can do a lot of other things.
Absolutely.
No, we're really looking forward to tomorrow, what you have to present to us, because there's going to be a lot on that Perennials Pasture, and some of the data that we've been doing from the trials we've done is not all adding up, so it's going to be really good to have your input there.
Well, we've made that shift into a lot of perennial based stuff. I think.
Well, what else is in your mix as well? You said a lot of Polaris.
A lot of Polaris. I mean, a lot of ryegrass.
Yeah.
Fair bit of clover. That's sort of the perennial mix. We've stayed away. I see that you mentioned we've never had any success with cocksfoot. Like for us, it's such a low production potential for animals. We just think it's very unpalatable. Very hard to get good animal production off it. But you spend all this money and you establish all these perennial pastures, and unless you manage them really effectively, and the management's taken out of your hands with dry seasons and overgrazing and forced into these things, trying to keep them really long term, because the replacement cost, and I've got some figures there in the spreadsheets there, but I think some of our annual ryegrasses and stuff, probably $300 or $400 a hectare.
Right.
Some of our perennials, I think the ryegrasses and that were $550. Foliar's going to be $600 a hectare to re-establish them.
Yeah, and just on that, how do you establish them? Are you a cultivation or no-till type of thing? Or?
Basically, we don't ever. Yeah, we use contractors on it. I'm not into much. I'm not there that much now, but I know the boys are absolutely for Polaris having good weed control and the right fertility. And I've always been a bit of I suppose early on autumn sowing, but it's very hard to get a really good kill, on weeds and stuff before an autumn break. But with most of our Polaris establishment now, I've got some photos you'll see tomorrow, is spring, and that's been very successful as long as you've got good weed control and adequate, P and K and N on them. So,
How are your summers over there? Are you worried about moisture if you're doing a spring planting?
No. Look, we've always been surprised. We don't want to sow Polaris until we've got soil temperatures of about 11 degrees.
Yeah.
And certainly with climate variability that's happening now, it's very hard. We love a perfect spring where you can get a couple of sprays, probably a month apart, get rid of all the crap out of there, sow into that, and then get a bit of rain. That's fine. But some years we've sowed, and it hasn't rained again after we've sowed, and it's got dry, and you go, shit. But the Polaris just seems to tolerate it.
Just sits there.
Yeah. We generally get a bit of summer rain. When I say that, summer storms and whatever, enough. I'm always surprised how, if it had been any other grass, it probably wouldn't have survived that summer.
Yeah.
But we are absolutely meticulous about, with Polaris particularly, how we graze it for 2 years. We put very, very little pressure on it,
Do you have a method of letting it seed or anything in its first year?
We let most of it come up and seed properly, and then we'll probably crash it with some cows for 4 or 5 days and just bash it down and then get them out of there again. As long as they're not interfering with the crown in the plant, it seems to be fine. But some of those Polaris paddocks we sowed this spring are now 4 feet high. You can hardly walk through them, but that's okay. But they want knocking over shortly, just to
bash them down a bit. No, that's really interesting. Have you got anything else actually you want to mention before we move on? There's got a couple of little extra bits I've found I want to talk about. So
no, I've said probably enough. Yeah.
No. Well, I actually noticed that most of the photos I found on you got a dog whistle around your neck.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Now, I've actually entered myself in one trial, and I love working dogs, but I'm not a trial member. Do you do a bit of dog work?
Well, since I've got a heap of border collies.
Yeah.
It started off as farm dogs, and as I've sort of spend less and less time being a farmer, more and more time with the dogs, and to the point now I probably spend 6 hours a day training dogs.
Right.
And I do a lot of cattle dog trials from here up north, but just now getting into 3 sheep trialling.
Right.
Love my dogs.
Yeah. And have you got a favourite one you want to talk about? What's one that stands out over the years?
Well, I've got an old dog there, Tig. He's a Morelands bred dog that Jack Hiscock, who used to be a very probably the top dog man in the 60s, 70s, 80s. I can remember going there when I was young. His dogs just dominated the 3 sheep trialling, but he could go and work a farm all week with them and come and win every trial. And his breed were Morelands, the Morelands breed, and about 15 years, I've always had a couple of work dogs around, but just farm dogs,
Yeah.
And anyway, I got a couple of Moreland dogs off a very good friend of Jack's, and I sort of bred a line up of what I think are good dogs. Other people mightn't, but and I spend most of my time now being told at 6 o'clock in the morning which cattle have to be moved here or there.
So you
or
get
whatever.
to take them out and work there.
So I work dogs every day.
Yeah.
We break all our cattle in. I think one of the big things that I think we've had a pretty big influence on is about good yard weaning processes in cattle. We yard wean properly to the point where, all those cattle been weaned a couple of weeks, broken into properly to dogs and a horse maybe. Yeah, dogs are good.
My wife, occasionally I've told her, don't let me ever come up the paddock without the dog if I'm going to move sheep.
Absolutely.
And sometimes I don't have them. I think I'll just move these animals, and every time her words ring in my head because, gee, they're a handy asset.
I've got a couple of videos there for tomorrow I put up about yard weaning and, team of dogs. And
yeah.
They're good. But, look, once we wean on the calves, we might have 1,000 calves in a mob. I'll put them out on the road every day and just drive them, go droving with them for each day, and they get them broken in, get them quiet. It's the way to do it.
Yeah.
It's made a big difference too, particularly with our labour efficiencies too,
Yeah.
all that, yep.
Yeah, now just quickly on the dogs, do you sit behind the cattle and push them with the dogs, or do you sit in front and let the dogs bring them up? Because I see there's a bit of a theory on each way at the minute.
Look, I do every way. In most cases, I'll probably sit way out to the side, out of the way. Happy to be up the front. The dogs just keep coming, bringing them. Anyway, I don't think it really matters.
Yeah.
The dogs are happy to do whatever I tell them to do. They get a fair bit of education.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But, like you put cattle out on the road and they might be stretched out for 2 kilometres and the gates open up, 1.5 k's up the road. I can send the dogs up there and just block the gate.
Unreal.
Bring them back and stuff like that. So I've got a couple of videos there I'll show you when we're finished.
Yeah, I can see the pride in your face of those dogs, and there's nothing actually better than seeing, especially a young dog, when it just starts to click for them, I reckon.
Yeah. I try and keep a couple of pups coming on all the time, because what happens with dogs, you get a good old dog and you use them, and you have a couple of young dogs, and you're always in a hurry and whatever, so you think, I'll just take the old dog, I'm in a hurry, and you never give your young dogs a chance.
Yeah.
I'm very much now, I'll always take the young dog before I take the old dog. If I know I could get tough, I might have an old dog in the back somewhere, but that, getting the work distributed fairly amongst the
well,
dogs,
I got a little story. I got a dog from Rod Cavell he's a Kelpie man.
I know, right?
And took a long time to get it. And anyway, he gave me the pup eventually and said, by the way, he probably won't show much interest for 6 or 7 months. And I thought, a young dog, if it's got the interest, it will show it straight away. Anyway, persisted and didn't show much interest. And so I was the same thing. I started leaving him behind and using the old dog. And the old dog got trod on in the yard, so I was a bit banged up. And so I had to take this young dog who was now about 6 or 7 months old, and I thought it's only a chance. And after a week in the yards, I almost forgot about the old dog.
That's what happens. Absolutely, I've got a couple like that. Yeah, it's actually interesting. You look at muster dogs and all those things, and they're great TV shows. And there's been a big emphasis on put a young dog in a yard and just see how much instinct's going to run at 10 weeks or 12 weeks. But when you speak to a lot of the really good old dogmen, a lot of them weren't concerned if their dogs weren't even looking at cattle at 6 and 8 months or sheep, And they often sort of reckon the age at which they sort of switch on is not really relevant to how good they're going to be later on.
Yeah.
And, look, everyone has an opinion, I guess, but certainly a lot of the border collies are a lot slower. to switch on than the Kelpie pup. Like you see 8-week-old Kelpie pups hard at it, you know. You go, oh shit, my dogs don't do that. You know, like, so and actually the best pup I've got at the moment, I think will be probably the best dog I've had. He wasn't really interested much at 5 or 6 months, but when he switched on full bore, you know. So it's a million stories.
Yeah, I remember Rod talking to me about picking a pup actually, and often we go in and pick the pup that's got that sort of aggressive little nature that's always into everything, and he actually reckons it's actually a sign of nerves often with the young dogs, whereas the one that's sitting in the corner just laying down, you think, oh, I don't want him, he's not a worker, but he's the calm, relaxed one.
I sort of agree with that. You know, there's an endless argument about Kelpies and Border Collies, and it's a bit like you're into Ford Falcons or Holdens, you know, but they've just got different attributes, you know, and I like those calm, cool, collected dogs, you know. I find high energy dogs sort of overwhelm me a bit. So I tend to select for those very controlled sort of dogs and independent. But I had an interesting time this year. We took a lot of cattle up north on the road out in western New South Wales when it got tough.
Right.
We had a really tough autumn. I reckon our autumn and winter was as tough as I can remember. So we had a whole lot of spring weaners at home who were costing me like $22 a week to feed, and they're probably only worth $700 at that time, back in about March. And so we ended up getting a grazing permit out west and took them up there, and I had 3 months up there on the road, or 2.5 months off and on, and my daughter's partner, he was sort of running the show. It was fantastic. Took my young dogs up there, made them, you know, just, it was good stuff. Yep.
You'll have to make that an annual thing by the sounds of it.
Yeah, well, I nearly could, I reckon. Yeah, wouldn't be hard.
No, very good. Now, I've got the last question that we'll finish on, Rod, and I did explain it to you, but what is something, if you had the chance to go back and sit down with yourself as a youngster, what advice would you give yourself if you could go back all those years?
I'd say, obviously, follow your dream and just go hard. Don't look back. Never look back. I think you just, once you start looking back, you've lost your vision forward. Accumulate knowledge, I think, is really key, one way or the other, you know. And I think probably from my perspective, learn to be better handling people. Early on, it tended to be because I was sort of so driven to do what I was doing. It was sort of my way or the highway, you know. Looking back, I could have done that a lot better, I reckon. As I got older and maybe a bit more wisdom, you see the error of your ways. And but that's all right. I think you've just, you know, unless you're going to have a go properly, you know, I think that's, you can make everything happen if you want it bad enough, I reckon. So, yeah.
No, I really appreciate your time in here now, and I know the listeners would really get a lot out of this conversation. I have.
Yeah, right.
So thank you, and we appreciate you coming down and look forward to tomorrow.
All right. Good, Al. Thank you.
All right. Bye for now.
See you.
A big thank you for tuning in today. And remember, if you have a question about today's episode or a topic you'd like us to cover, reach out to one of our many platforms and join the conversation. We're here because of your passion and commitment to agriculture. Together, we can build a stronger farming future.
This podcast is made possible by the Future Drought Fund Regional Drought Resilience Planning Program, co-funded by the Victorian and Australian governments.